This question comes from Alex, who asks, what if deserts suddenly bloomed? At first, it might sound like a paradise, flowers, greenery, and wildlife spreading across areas that were once barren. But the consequences would be more complex than you might think. Deserts cover about 1/5 of Earth's land surface. They exist because of a delicate balance of sunlight, temperature, wind patterns, and lack of rainfall. If they suddenly bloomed, it would require massive changes to the water cycle and the climate. Let's start with the immediate impact, the climate. Deserts reflect a lot of sunlight, keeping temperatures high and influencing atmospheric circulation. If deserts bloomed, plants would absorb more sunlight and increase transpiration, adding water vapor to the air. This could lead to sudden local cooling, heavier rainfall, and even storms in previously dry regions. Water distribution would be a major challenge. Currently, desert soil is dry and sparse. To suddenly support massive plant growth, enormous amounts of water would be needed. Aquifers would be depleted quickly, rivers could overflow, and surrounding ecosystems might struggle to adapt. The flora and fauna would change dramatically. New plants would attract insects, birds, and other animals. Predators would follow, creating new food chains. While this might seem positive, it could also lead to the extinction of species adapted to desert life. The classic desert dwellers, like cacti, camels, and certain reptiles, might struggle to survive in a suddenly wet environment. Human society would also be affected. Regions like the Sahara, Arabian Desert, and Australian Outback might become suitable for agriculture or settlement. But infrastructure is not designed for wet, green environments in these areas. Flooding, soil erosion, and sudden plant overgrowth could damage roads, cities, and farmland. Global agriculture might shift as deserts bloom. Countries could gain new arable land, potentially reducing famine and food scarcity. However, the sudden change could also disrupt existing farming zones as weather patterns shift and previously reliable rains become erratic. There would also be geological consequences. Deserts often act as buffers for tectonic and erosion processes. Sudden vegetation would stabilize some soils, but could also lead to landslides in areas that were previously dry. Sand dunes would lose their mobility, altering wind patterns and even affecting nearby coastal regions. Rivers and groundwater would be under pressure. Plants in newly blooming deserts would draw heavily on underground water sources. If the supply isn't replenished, aquifers could collapse, causing sinkholes or land subsidence. Rivers might flood nearby communities as water is redistributed. On a global scale, deserts blooming could impact climate patterns. The Sahara alone influences the monsoons of West Africa. If it suddenly turned green, rainfall patterns could shift across continents, affecting millions of people. Storm tracks might move, ocean currents could be altered, and seasonal cycles might change. There's also a carbon effect. Deserts store little carbon, but new plants would absorb CO2 rapidly. This might temporarily reduce greenhouse gases, cooling the planet slightly. However, if the vegetation dies off later due to unstable water supply, all that stored carbon could return to the atmosphere. In short, a sudden blooming of deserts would be beautiful but chaotic. New ecosystems would emerge, old ones would collapse, and human civilization would need to adapt quickly. Floods, shifting climates, and species migrations would make the world unrecognizable in a matter of years. So while the idea of deserts turning into lush landscapes seems idyllic, the reality would be a planet in flux. Life would adapt in unexpected ways, and humans would have to navigate a new Earth where water, land, and climate behave completely differently than before. The bloom might be stunning, but survival would be anything but simple.